If you love a good wrap skirt pattern or if you want to get started on a capsule wardrobe for spring and summer, Butterick 6934 is a great place to start. This is an easy wrap skirt pattern available in 2 length options. There's a button tab on the inside that keeps things together at one side seam and wide ties to complete the wrap on the opposite side. I sewed it up today in this lightweight rayon challis to create a look that's similar to that of the pattern cover. I hope you sew along with me. Let's get started. Here is the top edge of my right front skirt. We're going to prepare to hem this top edge with a rolled hem, first folding and pressing that top edge to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch. And once you have that edge folded by 5/8, we're going to open it out, take the raw edge and fold the raw edge to the crease that we created with the iron and give that a press. Now we should have 2 creases along that top edge, and we can roll that raw edge along the first crease and the second crease, and we have a nice rolled hem here at the top. Before we sew this in place, we're going to do the same to roll the hem along the front edge. Folding and pressing this front raw edge to the wrong side by 5/8, and opening it out and pressing again to the original crease. And then we can roll and press that entire front edge. At the top corner, trim the very point of your fabric by about 3/8 of an inch to eliminate some of the bulk at that pointed edge. Then you can tuck in that now straight 1/4 of an inch edge and refold your pressed creases along the top and side edge of that point. And that should allow you to get a nice clean point there. Now we're ready to stitch our hem in place, edge stitching close to that inner fold from the inner seam all the way to the point, and then pivoting at the point to sew all the way across that front edge and down to the bottom of the skirt. I've transferred my darts to the wrong side of my left front piece just using chalk. Now I'm going to fold each dart in half and pin from one side and out the other. Doing the same for both darts. Take it to the sewing machine and sew from the top of the dart to the point, leaving thread tails at the point to tie them in knots. And then press those darts toward the center. We're going to create narrow hems for the top and bottom edges of the tie, folding those raw edges to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch, and then folding the raw edges to meet that crease so that we can roll that hem. And we can trim that point just as we did for the right front skirt, so that we can press this edge to the wrong side by 1/4 of an inch and get a nice clean point there. Once everything is pressed in place, edge stitch close to that inner edge from the straight edge of the tie to the point, pivoting at the point to come back around the opposite side. Along the straight edge, I've transferred the crease marking and the broken line from the pattern piece just using pins. Working from the right side of the fabric, I'm going to fold the material along the crease line and then bring this fold to the broken line and pin in place. Now that we've created a pleat here, take it to the sewing machine and baste the pleat in place. Here is the top side edge of my left front piece with the right side of the material facing me. With the right side of the material of the tie also facing me, I'm going to place the raw edge of the tie at the markings that I transferred from the pattern piece and pin in place. Then I'll go back to the sewing machine and baste the tie in place. Since we're going to be sewing a buttonhole into the tab piece, I'm choosing to apply interfacing to the wrong side of the tab. Then I'm going to fold the tab piece in half, right sides together lengthwise. Then I'll sew the unmarked short edge and the long raw edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving the side of the tab that has dots marked from their pattern piece open. Then we can turn the tab right side out and give it a press. Then we're going to sew a buttonhole into the tab according to the markings from your pattern piece. I've transferred the markings from my pattern piece onto the opposite side of the left front from where we attached the tie earlier. And this is where we'll attach the tab, placing the raw edge along those markings and pinning in place. And then baste the tab in place. I've transferred the dart markings to the wrong side of my back skirt piece. Now I'm going to pin them in place just as I did for the front skirt. Then sew your darts in place and press them toward the center. Now I'm going to place my right front piece right sides together with the back piece and pin in place. Note that the top of your back piece will extend beyond the front by 5/8 of an inch. Then for the opposite back seam, I'm going to place my left front skirt right sides together with this back seam and pin in place from top to bottom. Sew both seams with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and finish the raw edges. Apply interfacing to the wrong side of your left front and back facing pieces. Then place these pieces right sides together along the left notched edge and pin in place. Sew with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and press the seams open. Now for the back facing piece, we're going to turn the side raw edge to the wrong side by 5/8 of an inch. Once that's pressed, trim that seam to 3/8 of an inch. Now we're going to start attaching the facing to the top of the skirt. I'm going to start with the folded edge of my back facing and place it along the seam where the top of the back skirt extends beyond the front. Line up the folded edge with that seam and align the top raw edges and pin in place. And then I'll align the opposite end of the left front facing with the raw edges of the left front skirt and pin in place along the top edge. And continue pinning from one end of the facing to the other, matching your notches. Then we're going to sew along the top of the facing from one side straight across to the opposite edge with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, being careful as you sew not to catch your short tie piece in your stitches. Once the facing is sewn to the top of the skirt, I'm going to finish the raw edges of the facing, starting from the folded edge all the way across the inner edge of the facing to the opposite raw edge. Then I'll place the facing right sides together with the left front piece and pin that edge in place. Sew from the top of the seam to the bottom of the facing with a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Then with the facing opened out away from the top of the skirt and the seams pressed up toward the facing, we're going to understitch. We're going to sew the facings to its seam allowance, edge stitching close to that seam line, from one side of the facing straight across as far as you can get to the opposite side of the facing. Now that that's understitched, I'm going to trim the top corner of the left front skirt to reduce bulk in that seam allowance. Turn the facing to the inside of the garment, poking out that corner, and give the top edge of the skirt a good press. Here's the inside of the skirt where the folded edge of the facing meets the seam line of the back skirt. Place the folded edge in line with the seam line, and using a needle and thread, I'm just going to slip stitch that edge of the facing in place. Additionally, at the seam where the two facing pieces are sewn together, I'm going to sew the bottom finished edge of the facing to the seam allowance underneath. Now we're going to create a narrow hem at the left front edge, pressing 5/8 of an inch to the wrong side, and then pressing the raw edge to that crease, forming the narrow hem. Once your narrow hem is folded and pressed, we're going to sew from the top to the bottom of the skirt, in line with and edge stitching along the inner fold of that narrow hem. Repeat to create a narrow hem along the entire bottom edge of the skirt, and then edge stitch in place from one edge of the skirt all the way across to the opposite bottom edge. I've transferred the placement marking of the button on the inside of the garment toward the side edge of the back facing. I'm going to place my button at that small dot marking and sew in place. And now your wrap skirt is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. If you've been enjoying these full-length sewing tutorials, please subscribe to the channel and share with your sewing friends. I'll see you in the next video.